this is what the crack of dawn looks like at a developer conference. 10 o'clock. How many of you didn't go to the party last night? That's why you're here. Thank you. And everybody else who should be here, who's still asleep or live streaming, we can shame them later. I'm Nicole Sanchez, and I'm the VP of Social Impact at GitHub. I'm so happy to be here, so happy to be talking to all of you today. I hope that you take the message from this presentation back to your companies, back to your organizations, back to the people with whom you collaborate on GitHub, so that we can all work together to make better things for the world. And that's the theme of what I'm going to talk about this morning, is that we have revolutionary tools at our disposal, and we haven't quite started to use them in a way that's truly going to change the world. But I think we can, and for 22 years I've been working on things like diversifying the field of technology, so that the more people from underrepresented backgrounds who have access to the tools to really make massive social change have access to them. So, in 2010, if you're a Star Wars geek like me, you'll appreciate this slide. I have imagined myself doing this on many occasions and hope to one day do it, even though we know that it's physically impossible at this point, but maybe not forever. In 2010, NASA and DARPA, they launched a search for a team in the private sector that would travel to the nearest star system and potentially inhabit it, because Earth is dying out. And our star, the sun, is not going to go on forever. So they granted $500,000 to the private sector team that could figure out how to not only travel the to a new star system, but how are we going to actually re-inhabit a place where humanity can thrive. The winning team was led by this woman. For those of you who don't know her, this is Mae Jemison, a personal hero of mine. She's the first African-American woman to go into space. She's the daughter of a teacher and a janitor from Decatur. And this is what she says about science. We look at science as something very elite, which only a few people can learn. That's just not true. And I want you to think about that for a second, because even in the field of tech, we love our elitism. I do too. We love how hard some of these problems are to solve. We love when we fix a bug. We love the technical problems and the solutions to them, but I maintain that the hardest problems to solve are not actually technical. They are human. And what Mae Jemison did in order to win this competition was put together a diverse team of people from multidisciplinary backgrounds who together are going to figure out how we're going to get to the next star system. So she didn't focus on the technology. She focused on the methodology and the process this team is going to use in order to inhabit a new star system. She took teachers and artists, technologists, astrophysicists. She also took peacemakers. She took social workers and put them all on a team together because, as she says, if you don't figure out how to be peaceful on the way to the next star system, what are we going to expect from that next place where humanity lives? And she won the grant, and now this is a project called the 100-Year Star System out of Houston. You can follow it along on Twitter, you can go to their website, and this is truly what their mission is. They're very Star Trek in the way that they have decided to do this. And it's being used as a model for a lot of technical problems to find solutions to them. A diverse team of people from backgrounds that often get overlooked by the elitism of her field. This is what I maintain we all need to do here in Silicon Valley and anywhere where we are creating tech tools to cause people to do something that they otherwise wouldn't have done. So when you think about your company and you think about your organization or some cool open source project you're currently working on, what are the hardest problems your company is trying to solve? I want you to think about that for a second. What's the hardest problem your company is trying to solve? And then I want you to think about the hardest problems society is trying to solve. How often do the problems your company is trying to solve overlap with the hardest problems society is trying to solve? I hope that increasingly in this next generation of our field, these two things overlap a whole lot more than they currently are. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So for those of you who don't know it, it's a generally accepted way of describing humans and what they need in order to live, survive, and thrive. At the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy is water, food, warmth, the very basics of human life. And as you get towards the top, it becomes more theoretical. So you get to people realizing their full creative potential. What I submit to you today is that the last generation of Silicon Valley, myself included and a lot of people here, have spent a whole lot of time towards the top of Maslow's hierarchy and bringing tech tools to bear on things like dating. Great, it's fine. People need companionship, that's definitely on Maslow's hierarchy. On delivering pizza to your front door. Fine, it's food. But we haven't spent nearly enough time at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. When you get to the most fundamental of human needs, this is where interesting stuff starts to happen. If you think about the access that we in this room have had to technology and to tech tools, if we as a community brought these things to bear on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, we're going to move mountains as humanity. We're going to move mountains together. That is what social impact at GitHub is fundamentally concerned with, is that we want to connect a different generation of folks from underrepresented backgrounds, bring them into the folds of places like GitHub and other open source collaborations, and see what happens. Because we believe that because a whole bunch of people in this last generation of technologists lived very comfortably towards the top of Maslow's hierarchy, that's where problems are getting solved. Entrepreneurs scratch their own itch, as my former boss Mitch Capor liked to say. Entrepreneurs live with a problem, and then they decide that they're going to fix that particular problem. But if you're not living with the problems at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, you have much less incentive to think about those things. The person I'd like to introduce to you today, who is somebody who's definitely working at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, in her technological training, skills, and creativity she's brought to bear to the Detroit Water Project, is somebody who was recently named to the Root 100, which means the 100 most influential Black Americans. She is a graduate of Y Combinator, and she's a good friend, and I'd love for her to talk about water. That fundamental, that simple, water. Please help me welcome Tiffani Ashley Bell. Get 'em.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Tiffani Ashley Bell, the founder and executive director at the Detroit Water Project, and I'm going to tell you a bit about what we're working on and just like how we help people using GitHub and tech, and can be super nerdy and still help people and change the world. So I want you to meet Latia. Latia is a single grandmother in Detroit who's worked 14 years as a caretaker. She would get up each morning to make sure people take their medication and look after other people and make sure they were in good shape. But at some point last year, actually September last year, after 14 years of taking care of other people, she finally needed to go on medical leave herself. This was okay, except for the fact that she was having to take unpaid medical leave. And what's more is that being a single grandmother with 5 kids under the age of 10, this was a problem. Now, I told you she was a caretaker, but the issue is that this also extends into her personal life. A few years ago, her good friend died, and she left behind 3 small kids, also under the age of 10. Now, Latia, sensing that they would be separated and wouldn't be taken care of as well, decided to adopt those kids as her own. This, in addition to having 2 of her grandkids. So 5 kids, all under the age of 10, as a single grandmother in Detroit. She was unable to pay for rent and utilities because she was on unpaid medical leave. She also couldn't pay the water bill either. But it turns out there's over 35 million other households in the United States alone that also have this same issue. They can't afford basic utilities like water and electricity. Now, as far as how I came to this, last year I was a Code for America fellow, and I read about how, in the course of just doing procurement and open data and transparency work for Atlanta, I read this article in The Atlantic that talks about how over 100,000 people in Detroit were about to have to live without running water because they hadn't paid their bills. And a lot of the reason why for many of them was that they couldn't actually afford the bills. They weren't going shopping and things like that. They couldn't afford the bills. They were just like Latia. They were on unpaid medical leave, they lost their jobs, or they had their hours reduced, or things of that nature. But this was a city-run water company that was turning people off, and I thought that was pretty crappy. I'll just be completely honest. And I'm being polite and saying crappy. But I thought it was pretty crappy. Because people, as I read more about this, people were doing things like keeping water in rain bins in their backyard. They were having to go to neighbors to take showers. Families were being broken up over this for a couple of reasons. If you're in high school, you don't want to be associated with the fact that your parents can't pay their water bill. And you're nervous about body odor and things like that. But you can also lose your kids if you don't have water in your house. Or you can just lose your house entirely. So all this stuff was going on. And I was pretty disgusted with what I read about it over the course of that entire day. And I actually didn't go to work. I just spent the rest of the day reading about this wherever I could. But I'm not the person to just read about things and just hope for the best for those people. So I do what I always do when I'm pissed off about something. I go to Twitter. If you follow me, I'm sorry. But so I asked, what do people do if they don't have running water in Detroit at this moment? And I wasn't really happy with any of the answers, partially based on some of the reading that people were doing things, like I said, like piping water from their neighbors, even using the bathrooms in their backyard because they couldn't flush their toilets and things like that. But my co-founder, our thought was, what if we could pay a bill for someone directly? What if we could go and just say, I want to give $100 to someone in Detroit and help them get their water turned back on? But at the time, there was nothing that you could do that with, pay a bill directly. So, like I said, I like to create things. I like to build things to help people. So using GitHub, of course, I slapped together a repo and got together some people that I knew, and then other folks that I didn't, that I just knew from Twitter. And these are actually the original 6 contributors, myself included. So the other 5 people there, I had never met 3 of them, and I still actually hadn't. But we put together this really janky site in like 4 hours that same night with Bootstrap and Heroku and Google Spreadsheets, popsicle sticks and chewing gum, basically. And our goal was to pretty much find people who needed help with their water bills and connect them to donors. So what we would do then is just give you an account number if you're a donor and tell you to go to the utility company site and pay that directly, and then send us the confirmation number when you're done. So we did that to the tune of, at this point, over 10,000 people have signed up to give toward water bills in Detroit. But essentially what we do, though, is we just match families who need help with their utility bills to people around the world that want to help by just giving $5, $50, sometimes $5,000, and that's broken up over different families. But the impact that we've had, though, is this: we've had over $230,000 in water bills paid between Detroit and Baltimore, just from people like you, giving $5, $10, whatever you can to contribute. And it's helped over 900 families in Detroit, like I said, in Baltimore, keeping their water on. But what's really cool, too, is that, as I mentioned before, you could actually lose your house by not paying your water bill, because they'll roll it into your property taxes and then sell your house from right under you if you don't have the money to pay the bill. And so we saved over 40 houses from water bill foreclosure in Baltimore since launching there in February of this year. But besides all this sort of like social good stuff as far as like the actual stories of helping people, we actually do some pretty nerdy stuff on the back end at this point that I'm really excited to talk about. But the greater thing is that we want to prevent this from happening for people in the future. Like, people kind of ask the question, like, why do people have this happen to them? And what can we do to kind of stop them? Like, we don't want them to be dependent on your program or whatever else. And that's all well and good, and that's true. So we want to use data to design targeted interventions for people and address why they actually need help in the first place. We can begin to use data to match people to local community organizations and help them with things like foreclosure prevention or low-cost home repairs if they had a leak or something like that, or budget counseling, or even legal aid, because some people, it turns out their landlord, they would pay their landlord their utility money, and the landlord actually wouldn't go pay the bill for them, and then they would get the shut-off notice. They would go home and their water is off, basically. So we want to actually help them with legal aid even. But we can use data science, too, to help utility companies identify people beforehand, like before they actually get the shut-off. Because it turns out they're actually not doing that, which to us is kind of stupid, but it would make sense to do. But we have the data to be able to do that. So essentially what happens, too, when someone applies for help, they give us their account number. And because the utility companies don't work with us officially, which is fine, we'll go in and we'll just scrape all the information from the utility company website. We'll just ingest everything. So we take in consumption histories, billing histories, payment histories, And we use all that stuff to analyze whether or not someone actually needs help, in addition to interviews and stuff like that with them. But we can go on to the utility company website and just take all that data in. And so thankfully, I was almost a math minor in school, so I'm pretty comfortable with stats. So we ended up writing this naive Bayesian classifier just to like throw all that data in there, and then just kind of figure out whether or not they actually fit the criteria for getting help and stuff like that. And so it's actually pretty cool to write from scratch, actually, because again, like I'm a serious nerd, so I kind of needed this part of the project to be there. In addition to spending tons of time talking to people. But this is actually the classifier running on the server. This is all Ruby on Rails backend, running on Amazon EC2 and stuff like that. And this runs, and actually it lets people, when people apply, they can technically get a decision about whether they're getting assistance or not in less than 5 minutes, or instantaneously, actually. But yeah, that's pretty much how that goes. And like, this is really pretty cool. You can just use all these technologies to do something really, really impactful for regular people. Not everybody needs a new photo app. They need stuff like this. They just need basic things. But I also mentioned I was a Code for America fellow. So I'm really interested in just like civic tech and how we can use all this sort of stuff, open data and utility data, to be able to drive civic engagement and help people out. I think that there's room for us to be using like data viz and stuff like that to be able to show people the effects of public policy, especially city council members and other folks that make utility policy. But I also think people can be educated and help to advocate for themselves using their own data. We can help them ask certain questions. So this, for example, is a map of the city of Detroit. And in July of this year, the city council there passed a resolution to raise water rates by 7.5% on top of people that already couldn't pay their water bills. And I thought that was pretty crazy. But given all the data that we have about tons of people that have applied for help, I was curious to see which council members that had voted yes, how many of them actually have people in our program that have applied for help. And so the most dense areas here are where city council members have voted yes, but they also have tons of their constituents that have applied for help and can't pay their water bills. So like this sort of thing, just sharing this with the public, can spur conversation and help people understand that you're making policy for people that you should probably be more in touch with, first of all, but then just think about the effects of what you're doing for them, or not doing for them, actually. But as far as the future goes, I really believe that we can use all this data to help people out in a more long-term way. Like, we're not going to continue paying water bills. There needs to be legislation in place to protect people that if you can't afford water, they should be able to shut you off just because you owe money. Because people generally can't afford their water bills. And it's funny because I went to the Detroit Water Department and I actually paid some bills in person. And people there admitted that people can't pay the bills, but they just shut them off, which is crazy. We want laws in place, and we can do that using data to kind of show people that this is not just some made-up situation. There's actual issues here. And I'm pretty inspired by LBJ as a president, so I'll leave you with this quote. And it kind of fits nicely with just GitHub and things like that, and collaborating with people that you've never met and getting things done. So he pretty much said, and he's talking about poverty here, the solution to these problems does not rest on a massive program in Washington, nor can it rely solely on the strained resources of local authority. It requires to create new concepts of cooperation, a creative federalism between the national capital and leaders of local communities. And I think it's pretty interesting how GitHub has allowed us to come together, people I've never even met, still haven't met, and to do this thing for people that need help, that need skills like all of us have here, to just have this very basic thing like water. And so if you want to get involved, you actually can. You can give toward a water bill, whatever you can afford. You can volunteer to help us make phone calls and do things of that sort. Or you can actually hack, because we've got some of our source code that's online that you can get involved with and actually contribute to. So if you're so inclined, go to DetroitWaterProject.org, and thank you.
Need that. Okay, so we want Tiffany inhabiting the next star system. We want more Tiffany's with the skills that she has and the outlook that she has, helping to improve humanity. I've already tried to hire her. She's not for hire. She's very dedicated to Detroit Water Project. But the minute she's not, I call dibs. Tiffany's outlook, her background, and her experience as a technologist are what caused her to be able to make such significant change at the ground level. Tiffany went around systems that had blocked people for a very long time to get them the very basics of what they needed. All right? The bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, we're talking about water, food, warmth, and then just up from that, safety and security. The punchline of Tiffany's project is that she and her co-founder, Christy Tillman, thanks to GitHub and other tools like Twitter, have never actually been in the same room before. They've been working on this for over a year, and they've never actually met and shaken hands. But it doesn't mean that the product is any less powerful, because they've figured out how to do this asynchronously over distance using their technical skills. These are two women who I have personally watched be overlooked as technologists. People look at them and say, oh, you can't possibly be a hacker. You can't possibly be a developer. And then Tiffany goes, ha, 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 let me show you what I just wrote, right? This kind of talent is latent in our country and in the world. This kind of genius is completely overlooked in some neighborhoods. We have overlooked it in this sector, and we need more of it. People with the outlook and the skills to build things for people who need some fundamental things. One of my other favorite apps that was built on GitHub is something called Refuge Bathrooms. Look it up, it's fantastic. Completely volunteer-driven, and it's specifically about crowdsourcing on a map where it is safe for trans and gender non-binary folks to use bathrooms. A fundamental need that causes real insecurity and a lack of safety for too many people. So a bunch of folks decided to get some map apps together and said, all right, if there is a restroom that you know trans folks can use safely, put it on this map. I have it on my phone for my friends and family, and it says, somebody needs to go to the bathroom, look, here's where we can go, and not have to worry about you being chased out of a restroom, God forbid, assaulted, or worse. These are fundamentally about the basic human rights that we all deserve, using technology at its center. We need more of these. So when you think not just about what the hardest problems are that your company is trying to solve, now let's think about who is trying to solve the hardest problems both in your company and in society. Right now, this is a map sourced from our own information about where open source happens the most. No surprise, it happens most in California and on the East Coast, from New York up to Boston. The blue is where more people are collaborating on open source than anything else. The green is where there are starting to be more emerging projects, and the yellow are these nascent communities that are really starting to take hold. But when you think about all of that talent that's overlooked, all of that talent that could be harnessed that isn't inside one of those dots, it's alarming at how much talent we have overlooked and laid waste to. What I'm interested in getting you involved in today, as well as Detroit Water Project, is something called ConnectHome. And this is something that GitHub is very, very proud about. We're very, very proud of our affiliation with ConnectHome. ConnectHome is a joint partnership between a nonprofit called EveryoneOn, the federal government, specifically housing and urban development, and several private sector partners, of which we are one. ConnectHome is going to bring broadband access to Americans living at or below the poverty line in massive amounts. So here are some statistics for you to consider when you think about why this is important. 1 in 4 households in America do not have internet access in their homes. 32% of people without broadband access in their homes still access the internet using only their phones. And 70% of American teenagers have to use the internet to finish their homework. These numbers don't add up. That means that in that 70%, there are people who are going to extraordinary lengths to access the internet because it is not available like it is for many of us in this room, where we just go home and our computer remembers our Wi-Fi password and we're good to go. That is something that I would like us to look more at as the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, because it is so congruent and so completely mappable to how much somebody's going to earn over the course of a lifetime, how much formal education they're going to be able to access, and in fact, how long they are going to live. You can map life expectancy to internet access at this point. That's where we are in society. So ConnectHome is getting into 28 communities right now. These are the demonstration communities. And we're especially interested in those that don't have those open source hotspots. So what's going to happen with ConnectHome is that internet service providers are going to bring to 750,000 people who currently don't have internet access in their homes. What we're doing as GitHub is working to make sure those homes also have devices, low-cost, easy-to-fix devices, things like a keynote or a Chromebook, where they can actually start to access from inside their homes. All right? We are not that interested. I'm just going to be perfectly clear. We're interested in people accessing as consumers. What is much more interesting is getting people access as creators of tech. People have figured out how to access the internet all over the place, but they have not had access to the information about how to create the Detroit water projects, the refuge restrooms of the world. And that's what we're interested in. This is a socioeconomic, fundamentally about jobs, economic justice, and access issue. If you can teach people not only how to access the internet, but how to be an active contributor on GitHub and learn how to build software that other people want, you are fundamentally employable in a middle class or higher job that has not been accessible in your community yet. All of these stars represent the places where internet access is now going to be accessible. They are all in public housing. We are targeting 750,000 people in public housing who today do not have access to the internet and very soon will. Yesterday, if you were at Chris Wanstrath's keynote, you heard him say that there are 20 million developers in the world. And we know that that's simply not true. We know that there are more. There are people who do not consider themselves to be developers, but they are. And I am fundamentally interested in those who do not yet know they are developers, figuring that out over the next few years. They do not know they have this talent and this genius and this creativity latent inside them because they have not had access to the education or the tools to make this a reality. We all have. That's great. It's time to spread that around. If you are affiliated with, if you are from, if you are located in any of these communities, these are the 28 places where this is going to be happening. Communities are meeting now in the month of October to get together and talk about who's going to teach people how to code, how are we going to get folks on GitHub, how are we going to make open source way less scary for people who are doing it for the first time, how are we going to seed their repositories with interesting projects so that they can say, NASA uses the thing that I'm now using, and you completely obliterate the imposter syndrome in between. How many of you have had a negative experience in the open source community? Raise your hand, raise it high. Okay, less of that. And one of the ways we're going to have less of that is by bringing a more diverse group of people onto platforms like GitHub to create things that are at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't create things at the top either. But when you are an entrepreneur and you're fundamentally interested in solving problems with which you've lived, guess what? Water, shelter, internet access, food security, body security, safety walking down the street. One of my favorite things I've ever witnessed in the tech field happened with Level Playing Field Institute's Level the Coding Field hackathon, which I helped found a couple of years ago. And these were middle school and high school students from Oakland, Redwood City, East Palo Alto, and a few other communities who came together to learn design methodology, a little bit of open source, a little bit of code. The most interesting thing that happened with these students, most of whom have never accessed computer science education at all before, was the kind of things that they designed. My favorite was a team that said, we want ways, but for safe pathways walking home from school. So if you are in a high school and you want to you're in a high school that has, in a neighborhood with a high crime rate, and you want to do an after-school program, and the buses stop running when you're done, you walk home from school in the dark. You don't know, as a student, which streets have streetlights that are out, have currently had crime reported on those streets. You don't know much. You're taking a chance every time you walk home, and what these students wanted to do was crowdsource the information to create safe pathways walking home from school. That's their app. How easy would it be for us to do that right now, given the knowledge that's just in this room? Pretty easy. And that was really interesting to watch them say, oh, this technology exists. If I just knew how to fiddle with it on the back end, I could make it useful for my entire school. And we said, yeah. And now we've helped create a whole bunch of technologists and inspire them to be the Mae Jemisons who are going to solve these problems moving forward. We want this, yes? Yes, we want this. Yes, we want this. All right, so the next person I'm going to bring up is a new friend of mine. EveryoneOn is the nonprofit organization that's working with us to do ConnectHome, along with HUD and some other government agencies. EveryoneOn is the nonprofit that is collecting the donations and doing a ton of the coordination to make sure that this access to broadband internet service in homes is meaningful and not just a platitude. So I'd really like for you to hear from my brand new friend, Chike Aguh. To stand here and shake your hand.
First of all, I want to thank Nicole Sanchez and the Social Impact Dream Team here at GitHub for having me here today. And my name is Chike Aguh, and I am the Chief Programs Officer of EveryoneOn. And we are a national nonprofit dedicated to closing the digital divide. We were created because we believe that no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what you look like, you have a right to access to the internet and the opportunity that it brings. Over the last 2.5 years, we have connected over 500,000 low-income Americans by partnerships with ISPs, device manufacturers, content providers, and I want to tell you about two of them. Maria lives in Phoenix, Arizona. She has 3 kids, 12, 7, and 5. She's working to get her associate's degree at her local community college. And she didn't have internet at home when we met her. And every day she would go home by 5 o'clock. She would take her 3 kids, and they would go to the library. She would put each of her kids on a computer for 45 minutes, because that was the limit that you could be on a computer at the library. And they would do as much homework as they could during that time. And because of it, they were getting C's and D's in school. And during that 45 minutes, while they were doing their homework, she would write papers for her associate's degree on her iPhone. We were able to connect her. We were able to connect her to the internet at home, and her kids are now doing better in school. She was able to finish her associate's degree, and her husband, who lost her job during that time, was able to get online training and get a new job. I want to tell you about Dariel Bryant, who is a young man in high school in Miami, and every day after school, because he doesn't have internet at home, he gets on the bus and basically takes the public transit system through the roughest parts of Miami, from McDonald's to McDonald's, to get access to Wi-Fi so that he can finish his homework, at times till 1 a.m. in the morning. Again, we were able to get him connected and have him safe at home doing his homework. There are tens of millions of people like that in this country, and if we had 60 million people who didn't have access to electricity, we would be outraged. If we had 60 million people who didn't have access to indoor plumbing, we would be shocked. And we need to realize that internet is just as important as that, and we need to be just as outraged. We are honored to be part of the ConnectHome initiative. 275,000 households in 28 communities living in public housing. And families who live in public housing have an average income of $13,000 a year, and working to get them access to the internet within the next 2 years. One of the biggest examples of why this work is so important is actually a GitHubber, and his name is Danilo Campos, who some of you may know. And Danilo Campos is someone who has had millions of people look at the code that he's written, whether it be mobile apps or within a browser. He's, again, a social impact superstar here at GitHub. And that's where his story ends. But where his story begins is coming to the United States when he was 2, as an immigrant from Puerto Rico with his single mom, growing up in public housing in New York, and having his life changed when he was able to get internet access in his home and begin to teach himself how to code. That is what ConnectHome is about, because there are thousands, millions of Danilos across this country, and talent is universal, as he shows us, but opportunity is not. And that opportunity, more and more, is coming through the internet. Here's the last thing I want to say. If you can't tell by the name, my family is from Nigeria. My parents are from a small village that most Nigerians will never go to and will never visit. None of my grandparents went past middle school. My parents literally grew up with Peace Corps volunteers in their classrooms. And the thing that changed my father's life, my family's life, was when he got a scholarship to come study here in the United States. The education that my father crossed an ocean for, now today is as close as an internet connection. And if we don't get that internet connection to every family, every student, no matter who they are, no matter where they live, it is morally indefensible. It is economically irresponsible. So I want to reiterate everything that Nicole said. We want to thank GitHub for all that they do, and I really want to implore everyone who can take part to take part in this effort to make sure that the digital divide is closed now and tomorrow and forever. Thank you so much.
I just need the clicker. Oops. All right. So if you want to get involved, this is the email address to use, connecthome@github.com. GitHub's commitment, which we challenge you to match, is $250,000 in cash to this, $3 million in product, and 2,000 hours of our GitHubbers' time going to communities on the ground to teach people how to code, to learn about what the issues are that people are facing, and to really make open source, and GitHub specifically, accessible. We expect to find genius on the ground. We expect to find the next innovators, disruptors, whatever word you like to use. We want to get rid of this notion of the hero entrepreneur who does this all by himself somewhere mysteriously in a garage in Silicon Valley. That's not how this next generation of tech tools is going to be created. They're going to be created by the kid in Macon, Georgia. She doesn't even know today what Python is. And in a year, she is going to be building things that she only thought to be possible. We have examples of that here in Silicon Valley, just not enough. It is your job and my job to make sure that we get more of those people. Because for every generation whose talent we've overlooked in communities like Meriden, Connecticut, like Tampa, Florida, like the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, every time we've overlooked that genius, we've said goodbye to a cure to cancer. We've said goodbye to somebody figuring out how to get universal access to water. We've said goodbye to the thing that's going to take us to the 100-year star system and allow humanity to actually thrive in a way that we didn't on this planet. I know this is very highfalutin. This sounds very much up here, which is why I really wanted to introduce you to Tiffany and Chike, who are doing things that are extremely tangible that you can get involved with. GitHub is so proud to have a social impact team now that is completely joined with our business objectives. This is not the philanthropic arm of GitHub. This is not the, you're the diversity lady of GitHub. This is how GitHub itself is going to grow, and we challenge you to go back to your companies, talk about things like the Detroit Water Project, talk about ConnectHome, and say, how are our companies' problems that we're trying to solve going to match the same problems that society is trying to solve? And who do we have here on staff who's ready to do that? Do we have the right people assembled to get to the point where we can actually talk about access to water and housing and food and body security and safety? Do we have that now? It seems very, very far removed from a lot of our missions, but I bet you that it's not. And if anybody would like to talk about that, I'm happy to do that with you. 22 years of doing this, we're just seeing traction right now. Me personally, having done this in this sector for 22 years, we're just now seeing traction. I probably will not live to see the day when this comes to fruition. Let's just be honest. But if we do not start now, none of us, including my children, your children, our grandchildren, are going to reap the benefits of the latent genius and talent that is currently in those 28 cities and beyond, with people who are not accessing the same tools that we in this room access. That's it. And I really, really hope that you take us up on this invitation, because GitHub is very proud to be a leader in this regard, and we plan on doing it for years to come. Thank you very much.